Parasite Eve. The opening is a little interesting, I guess. The main character is this attractive young woman who is on a date to the opera. Okay. I like how the opera seems to be the exact sort of silly drama you would expect from an actual opera. The scene is dragging a bit. I hope the introduction of this game isn't overly long. Oh, the lady is singing. Sounds pretty nice, I guess. Okay game, you have my attention. So as I said in my last video, I tried a number of different RPGs for the PS1, and while most of them had good qualities, I couldn't stick with them for very long. But this was the game that kept me interested, and you can probably see why. Rather than taking place in a fantasy setting, the game instead takes place in the real world, and rather than some epic journey to save the world, the game goes for more of a mystery thriller kind of vibe. In Parasite Eve, you take control of an NYPD police officer named Aya, who is on a date that, as you can see, goes about as horribly wrong as a date can possibly go. The singer who somehow set people on fire is a woman who was formerly named Melissa, but now goes by the name of Eve and has mysterious and deadly powers. Eve can kill anyone who gets too close to her, but for some reason Aya is unaffected by her powers, and so is the only one who can investigate her. Over the course of 6 days, Aya must try to track Eve down, find out what's going on, and stop her before she causes any more damage to the city of New York. As far as RPGs go, it's very unique. The combat system is sort of turn-based, but you can freely run around to the battle areas, and if you miss an enemy, it's because you actually missed them, not because the game just decided that your attack didn't connect even when it clearly did. And another thing I appreciate about the game is that it actually explains the random encounters. In other RPGs, the random encounters just kind of show up out of nowhere, and in many cases are clearly just there to add some gameplay to a game that is clearly more focused on the story, and they often feel out of place. But here they actually make sense, and add to the story and setting rather than distract from it. In many ways the game is similar to Resident Evil, as it has a similar look, and the gameplay is actually fairly similar too. The main difference is that Resident Evil had real-time combat, while Parasite Eve's combat system is more RPG-like. When it comes to the story and characters, Parasite Eve is much better than Resident Evil. But when it comes to the actual gameplay, Parasite Eve is actually worse, which is a problem. While Resident Evil has its faults, you felt like you were in the driver's seat when it came to the game's pacing. You were the one who fought the enemies, explored through the mansion and/or police station and/or city, depending on the game, and made it to the end using your wits and quick thinking. But in Parasite Eve, you're much more restricted in what you can do and where you can explore, and it suffers from the same problem a lot of RPGs have, where the gameplay almost feels like an afterthought. There is some interactivity to the game's world, but for the most part you're just along for the ride, and it feels more like an interactive story than an actual game. And interactive stories can work. I mean, one of my favorite games of all time is To the Moon, which is a great example of an interactive story done right. But it's a fine line. The gameplay has to be engaging enough to make the player feel like they are an active participant in the story, but at the same time the gameplay has to avoid getting in the way of the story. And Parasite Eve kind of fails with the latter issue, as a lot of the gameplay feels like an obligation you have to go through to get to the next part of the story. And while I liked the combat system better than in other RPGs, it still gets rather repetitive and tedious. Although it does come alive during boss fights, those are pretty cool. So while I liked it, it does show its age, and while as a story it's pretty solid, as a game it's got some major issues. But if you like RPGs or the older Resident Evil games, I would say it's definitely worth a look. My final score is a 6 out of 10. I will say that I liked it a bit more than the Resident Evil games, though again that's because it has better story and characters. Like I said, Resident Evil is better in the gameplay department. So what do you think? Have you played Parasite Eve? What's your favorite RPG that deviated away from the standard formula of RPGs? Whatever you think, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you like what I do, feel free to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.